Landlord ignored my broken air conditioner and threatened to raise rent. I spent weeks obsessively researching tenant laws, found my apartment was technically illegal because the building lacked a certificate of occupancy, confronted him with a binder full of evidence, and got my air conditioner fixed and rent kept the same without ever having to go to court. I didn't win through being smart or brave. I won through being stubborn and annoying enough to make him realize I wouldn't go away. I should probably start by saying I'm not a lawyer or anything like that. I'm a graphic designer who works from home, and I just wanted my air conditioning to work. That's literally how this whole thing started. It was July. The kind of July where you wake up at 6 in the morning already sweating. My apartment is on the top floor of this old Victorian house built in the 1880s that's been split into 3 units. The landlord, Frank, lives in the suburb and owns about 8 properties in the city. He's the type of guy who calls himself a small business owner on his voicemail, which I always thought was weird because he's just a guy who owns buildings. The air conditioner unit in my living room had been dying for months. It would run, but it wouldn't actually cool anything. It was just pushing warm air around and making this grinding noise. I had emailed Frank about it twice in June. The first time, he replied, "I'll have someone look at it." The second time, he didn't reply at all. I called him, left a message, nothing. I was sitting in my apartment on a Saturday afternoon. It was 89 degrees inside. I had 3 fans running and they were basically just swirling hot air. I was trying to work on a client project and my laptop kept overheating and shutting down. I remember sitting there in my boxers, sweat dripping down my back, staring at this stupid air conditioner unit like it had personally wronged me. So I sent Frank another email. This one was more direct. I said the air conditioner was completely non-functional, that it had been over 2 months, and that I needed him to fix it or replace it because I couldn't work in those conditions. He called me back within an hour. "Look, I've got a guy coming next week," he said. His voice was all business. "No, hello. It's not that big of a deal. You can buy a window unit, and I'll deduct it from next month's rent." I was so annoyed. "Frank, I already have a unit. It's built into the wall. I'm not going to buy another one. It's just hot, you'll be fine. I've had tenants there for years without air conditioning. I've lived here for 3 years and it always worked before." He sighed. I could hear him sighing. "Tell you what," he said. "I've been thinking about raising the rent anyway. Market rate's gone up. So if you want, we can get a new unit in there and I'll bump it up. Or you can wait and I'll have my guy look at it. Your choice." I just sat there. I couldn't even process it. He was using a broken appliance as leverage to raise my rent. My rent that was already 40% of my income. "Just have the guy look at it," I said. "Please." "Fine. End of the week." And he hung up. I spent the next few days just being furious. I was living in this tiny, sweltering apartment, paying too much money to a guy who couldn't be bothered to fix a basic thing. My girlfriend, Jen, kept telling me to just call a repair guy myself and bill him, which is fine in theory, but I knew Frank would just dispute it or drag it out. I was venting to my friend Mark at a bar. We were having beers and I was complaining about Frank, and the air conditioner, and the rent threat. Mark's a teacher, so he deals with a lot of bureaucratic stuff. He was like, "You probably have rights. Like, tenants have rights." I rolled my eyes. "Yeah, I know. But what am I going to do? Sue him?" "No, I mean like, there's laws. You can't just let a place become uninhabitable and then raise rent. That's not how it works." He said it so matter-of-factly that it got me thinking. So that night, instead of watching television, I opened my laptop and typed tenant rights, my state, into Google. I was honestly expecting to find a bunch of legal mumbo-jumbo that I wouldn't understand and give up after 10 minutes. But I found this government website. It was ugly. Like, really ugly. Beige background, Times New Roman font. The kind of website that looks like it was built in 1998 and never updated. It had a section called Landlord and Tenant Obligations, and I started reading. I was expecting to find rules about security deposits, maybe something about notice periods for eviction. But I found this whole section about implied warranty of habitability. And I read it and it basically said that landlords have to maintain a property that's fit for living. That includes things like heat, water, and yes, if the place has air conditioning, you have to keep it working. You can't just let it break and do nothing. And you definitely can't use it as an excuse to raise the rent. I felt kind of stupid for not knowing this. It's not like it's hidden information. It's just a thing that exists and I never had to think about it before. Then I kept scrolling. And I found something about certificates of occupancy. It was this weird, specific thing. The website said that in my city, every rental unit has to have a valid certificate of occupancy on file with the city. It's basically proof that the building is up to code and safe for people to live in. And if it's not, the landlord can't legally collect rent. The city can even revoke it. Now, I should mention something. The house I live in is old. Like, built in the 1880s old. And it's clearly been modified over the years. My unit used to be the attic, but they put in a kitchen and a bathroom and made it a full apartment. That was probably done a while ago, maybe before the current laws even existed. I don't know why, but something just clicked in my head. I looked up what the official square footage was for my address. There's this city property database, where you can look up basic information about any building. And I found my building. It listed the building as a single-family residence. Not a 3-unit multifamily. Single family. I stared at the screen for a long time. I was just sitting there in my underwear, sweating, staring at this property record that showed my building was technically a single-family house. I didn't even know what to do with this information. But I felt something. It wasn't hope, exactly. It was more like curiosity. Like, what if Frank never legally converted this place into a rental? What if he's just been collecting rent on an illegal apartment for years? I took a screenshot. Then I took another screenshot. I emailed them to myself with the subject line miscellaneous property. I felt like a crazy person. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about this certificate of occupancy thing. I didn't even know what it was. I just knew the city had a record that said my house was something it clearly wasn't. And Frank was raising my rent. And my air conditioner was broken. And I was just lying there in the dark, sweating, thinking about how simple this all could have been if he'd just fixed the goddamn air conditioner. I didn't plan to do anything about it. I really didn't. I just wanted to know if I was right. I wanted to see if I could find out if Frank had ever gotten a proper certificate for converting this place. So the next morning, I started making calls. And honestly, it was a disaster. I don't know why I thought I could just call the city and they'd be like, oh yes, here's all the information you need, let me fax it over. That's not how any of this works. I called the building department first. Got put on hold for like 20 minutes. The hold music was this terrible elevator music version of some song I couldn't identify. I was sitting there with my coffee getting cold, listening to this garbage, and I almost hung up 3 times. But I didn't. Finally this woman answered. She sounded tired. I explained I was a tenant and I wanted to know if there was a certificate of occupancy for my building. She asked for the address. I gave it to her. She put me on hold again. I heard her typing. Then she came back and said, I'm not seeing anything under that address. Are you sure it's the right property? I told her yes, I lived there. She said, well, we don't have a certificate on file. That doesn't necessarily mean there's an issue. Some older buildings were grandfathered in. But I'd recommend having your landlord contact us. And that was it. She wasn't going to give me any more information. I'm just some random guy calling. I have no authority. I hung up feeling like an idiot. Like what was I even doing? I'm not a detective. I'm a graphic designer who can't get his air conditioner fixed. But something about that conversation bugged me. The way she said, I'm not seeing anything felt different than there's nothing to see. It felt like she didn't have the full picture. Or maybe I was just projecting because I wanted to be right. I decided to look at the property database again. There was this section I'd scrolled past before that had permits listed. I clicked on it. There were permits for electrical work from the 1990s. A permit for a new roof from 2001. But nothing about converting the attic into an apartment. Nothing about adding plumbing or electrical for a kitchen and bathroom. I printed out the property record. My printer jammed. It's an old HP that I've had since college, and it jams constantly. I spent 15 minutes wrestling with it, getting ink all over my fingers, swearing under my breath. Finally I got one decent printout. I felt like I was building a case, but I didn't even know what I was building a case for. That night I went down a rabbit hole. I started looking up certificate of occupancy requirements, my city, and found this document that was about 80 pages long. I skimmed it. Most of it was about commercial buildings. But there was a section about residential conversions. It said that if you convert a single-family home into multiple units, you need to get a new certificate of occupancy. And you have to meet current building codes. Fire safety, egress, electrical capacity, all of it. I thought about my apartment. The stairs are narrow and creaky. There's only one way in and out. I have a smoke detector, but I don't think it works. I never tested it. The electrical outlets are all two-prong, no grounding. It's clearly an old attic that someone threw some drywall and cabinets into. I'd always thought of it as charming, but now I was starting to see it differently. I spent 3 hours on the city's website. My eyes were burning. I had so many tabs open. There was one page that kept freezing my browser. Another page had a broken link. At one point I just sat back and stared at the ceiling and thought, what am I doing? I'm never going to figure this out. I almost gave up. I was ready to just call Frank back and say fine, fix the air conditioner, and raise the rent, or whatever. Just get it over with. I was exhausted and frustrated, and I didn't want to be the guy who sues his landlord over a broken appliance. That's such a pathetic thing to do. But then I found something. It was buried in this document. Page 47 of this giant document. A little clause about non-compliant certificates of occupancy. It said that if a landlord is collecting rent without a valid certificate, the tenant has grounds to withhold rent. And if the city gets involved, they can order the landlord to bring the property up to code, which can take months. And the landlord can't evict the tenant in the meantime. I read it 3 times. Then I read it again. I don't know why, but I started laughing. I was just sitting there in my stupid hot apartment, laughing at my laptop. It wasn't like a happy laugh. It was more like a, this is so absurd I can't process it laugh. Because here was this boring, dry, completely unremarkable clause that could completely screw over Frank. And he probably didn't even know it existed. Or maybe he did and he was just gambling that nobody would ever check. I bookmarked the page. I emailed the document to myself. I took screenshots of the relevant sections. I was doing all this stuff I'd seen people do in movies when they are building a case, but it felt ridiculous. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what I'm doing. I was just some guy with too much free time and a broken air conditioner. I called my friend Mark the next day. I found something weird, I said. You know that certificate thing I was telling you about? I think my building doesn't have one. And I think Frank might be violating the law. Mark was quiet for a second. Then he said okay, but what are you going to do with that information? Are you going to call him and say I found a loophole, fix my air conditioner or else? That's kind of insane. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, it's not a loophole. It's literally the law. He's supposed to have this thing and he doesn't. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying, this is your landlord. He knows where you live. He has your security deposit. Are you sure you want to pick this fight? That gave me pause. Because Mark was right. Frank could make my life miserable. He could just not renew my lease. He could claim I damaged something and keep my deposit. He could do a million petty things. But then I thought about the air conditioner. And the rent increase. And the way he talked to me like I was an inconvenience instead of a person paying him money every single month. And I was just so tired of being afraid of this guy. I'm not going to do anything stupid, I told Mark. I'm just going to gather more information. Just to see. You're doing the crazy person thing, he said. You're building a binder. Shut up. You are. You're making a binder. You're going to have tabs and everything. I hung up on him. But he was right. I did start making a binder. I bought one of those 3-ring binders from CVS. I got those plastic tab dividers. It felt completely unhinged. I told myself I was just organizing things. That's what organized people do. But I knew I was building a weapon. The thing is, once you start noticing things, you can't stop. I started noticing all the little things about my apartment that didn't seem right. The way the windows didn't open properly. The fact that there was no carbon monoxide detector. The weird patch on the ceiling where the drywall didn't match the rest. The bathroom fan that vented into the attic, not outside. I started taking photos. I'd take a photo of the bathroom fan vent, the weird ceiling patch, the electrical outlet that had a ground prong, but no actual ground wire. I'd email them to myself with notes. Bathroom vent, no exterior venting. Electrical and grounded outlets. Smoke detector unknown. I looked like a lunatic. I was walking around my apartment taking photos of everything like I was investigating a crime scene. But I couldn't stop. It was like picking at a scab. I kept thinking, what else is wrong with this place? I also started looking up Frank. His full name was Francis Mulligan, which I'd never known. I found his business license. I found property records for his other buildings. I even found some old court cases where he'd been sued by tenants for security deposit stuff. Nothing major, just small claims. I felt like I was becoming obsessed. It was all I thought about. I'd be at work, trying to design a logo for some coffee shop, and I'd be thinking about certificates of occupancy and building codes and whether Frank had ever actually gotten a permit for the plumbing in my unit. I knew I needed to slow down. I knew I was getting ahead of myself. I still didn't even know if I had a case. I had a lot of suspicions and a lot of paper, but I didn't know if any of it actually added up to anything. I decided I needed to actually see the certificate of occupancy. Or, more specifically, I needed to see if there was any record of one being issued. The city wouldn't give me that information over the phone. But there was a records office downtown. You could go in person and request copies of public records. I'm not a public records person. I've never been to a records office. I don't know what they do there. But I took a day off work and I went. The records office was in this old government building. It smelled like old paper and floor wax. There were these long counters and people in suits walking around with folders. I felt totally out of place. I went up to the front desk and told the guy I wanted to request records for my address. He handed me a form. I filled it out. He took my identification, made a copy, and told me to wait. I sat on one of those hard plastic chairs in the hallway. I sat there for an hour. I was checking my phone, getting bored, almost leaving. But then this woman came out and handed me a manila folder. She said, "This is everything we have for that address. You can look at it here. No photos, no copies. You can take notes if you want." The folder was thin. Like, maybe 10 pages. I opened it and started going through. Mostly it was just tax records. Some old permits for work on the roof. An inspection from the 1990s. But there was no certificate of occupancy. None. For the building in general, or for my specific unit. It just wasn't there. I read through everything twice. I took notes in my little notebook. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew I hadn't found it. I handed the folder back and left. Walking out of that building, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't confidence, exactly. It was more like validation. Like I wasn't making this up. The city had no record of my apartment being legal. Frank had been collecting rent on an unregistered unit for years. And he had the audacity to threaten me with a rent increase. I needed to talk to Frank. I needed to show him what I'd found. But I was terrified. I didn't know how he'd react. I didn't know if this would make things better or 10 times worse. But I knew I couldn't just keep sitting on this information. I had to do something. Even if it was stupid. Even if it backfired. So I called him. And I told him I needed to meet. In person. So I called Frank and told him I needed to meet in person. He said he was busy, of course. He always said he was busy. I told him it was important, and it was about the apartment, and he kind of sighed, and said he could come by on Thursday after work. That gave me a few days to actually get my stuff together. I had all these notes and printouts and screenshots, but they were just scattered everywhere. I needed to actually organize it into something coherent. Something I could show him and say, look, here's the problem. I spent Tuesday night in my living room with the binder and a bunch of highlighters. I was going through every piece of paper I had collected. The property record showing the building was listed as single-family. The city website printouts about certificate of occupancy requirements. My notes from the records office. The photos I'd taken of my apartment. I organized them into sections. I should probably explain how I got the city records. It wasn't as dramatic as it sounds. I just went to the records office, filled out a form, waited around for an hour, and got a thin folder. The guy at the desk was bored and barely looked at me. I had to stand there in this fluorescent-lit room, squinting at old documents, scribbling notes on a pad of paper I'd brought from home. It was pathetic. I felt like I was doing a school project I'd procrastinated on. But the thing is, the records were useful. Not because they showed something was wrong, but because they showed nothing was right. There were records for the property from the 70s, 80s, 90s. But no certificate of occupancy for a converted multifamily. And no permits for the kind of major structural work you'd need to turn an attic into an apartment. I printed out the state law about implied warranty of habitability and highlighted the relevant section. I printed out the city ordinance about certificates of occupancy. I printed out the property record. I put each one in its own section of the binder. By Wednesday night I had maybe 30 pages in this binder. I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. working on it. I was exhausted and hungry, and I'd spilled coffee on one of the printouts and had to reprint it. My printer jammed twice. At one point I just sat on the floor surrounded by paper, and thought, I am going to show up to my landlord with a binder, and he's going to laugh in my face. And honestly, I almost didn't do it. I almost called the whole thing off. I was so tired and I just wanted the AC fixed and I didn't want to be the crazy guy with the binder. I texted Jen about it and she said, you're doing too much, just talk to him like a normal person. And she was right. I was doing too much. But I couldn't stop. It was like a compulsion. I just kept thinking about how Frank had talked to me on the phone. How dismissive he'd been. How he'd tried to use a broken appliance as an excuse to charge me more money. And I got angry again. Thursday came. Frank was supposed to come by at 6 p.m. I spent the whole day nervous. I couldn't focus on work. I was just waiting. I cleaned my apartment because I didn't want him to see it messy. Which is ridiculous because he's the landlord and he's seen it messy before. But I was nervous. I straightened up the kitchen, took out the trash, put the coffee mugs away. He showed up at 6:15. I heard him coming up the stairs. He knocked on the door and I opened it. He was this older guy, maybe 60, grey hair, wearing khakis and a polo shirt. He looked like a retired golf instructor. He didn't smile. Hey, I said. Thanks for coming. Yeah, so what's this about? He walked right past me into the apartment without waiting to be invited. He looked around like he was inspecting the place. The AC's still not working. It's still not working. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about. He turned to look at me. Then what is it? I don't know why, but suddenly I was really nervous. My hands were shaking a little. I had the binder in my hands and it felt stupid. Like, who brings a binder to a conversation about a broken AC? I almost didn't say anything. I almost just said never mind and let him leave. But then I thought about all those late nights. All those hours on hold. All that frustration. And I just opened the binder. I did some research, I said. About the building. About the apartment. And I found some things I think you should know about. Frank looked at the binder. Then he looked at me. He didn't say anything. He just crossed his arms and waited. I started with the property record. I showed him the printout that said the building was listed as a single-family residence. I said, the city has this building listed as a single family. But there are 3 units here. Yours, mine, and the downstairs one. Frank stared at the paper. He didn't react. He just stared. That's not a big deal, he said. Old buildings, they have classification issues sometimes. Okay, I said. But then I went to the records office. And I asked to see the certificate of occupancy for this building. And there isn't one. I pulled out my notes from the records office. The thin folder, the absence of any certificate. I showed him. Frank's face changed. Just a little. The corners of his mouth tightened. His jaw clenched. He looked at the paper, then at me, then back at the paper. You went to the records office, he said. His voice was different. Lower. Yeah. I wanted to understand the situation. You have no right to. I have a right to know if my apartment is legal, I said. And I think it might not be. It got quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming. I could hear traffic outside. Frank didn't say anything. He just stood there with his arms crossed, staring at my binder like it was radioactive. I kept going. I told him about the photos I'd taken. The bathroom vent, the ungrounded outlets, the single exit. I said some of these things might be grandfathered in, but some of them wouldn't pass inspection. And without a certificate of occupancy, an inspection would probably go badly. You're threatening me, Frank said. It wasn't a question. I'm not threatening you. I'm just saying I found this stuff. And I think you should know about it. The city would probably be interested. Frank laughed. It was a short, sharp laugh. You think you're going to blackmail me? Over a broken AC? No, I stopped. I hadn't thought of it that way. I'm not blackmailing you. I'm telling you I have concerns. And I'd like you to fix the AC. And I don't want a rent increase. And if I don't? I shrugged. Then I'm going to call the building department. And I'm going to ask them to inspect the property. And when they find everything I've found, they'll probably make you fix it. And they'll probably fine you. And you won't be able to collect rent until it's fixed. Frank stared at me. I could see him doing the math in his head. The cost of bringing the building up to code. The lost rent. The fines. The legal fees. His face was getting red. You don't know what you're talking about, he said. This is all bullshit. You're making stuff up. I can prove all of it, I said. I have the documents. I have the photos. I can send it all to the city right now. The room was quiet again. I was shaking a little. I didn't feel brave or smart. I felt like I was about to throw up. Frank walked over to my window. He looked out at the street for a long time. I just stood there holding my binder, watching him. I had no idea what he was thinking. Finally he turned around. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked, I don't know. Tired, maybe. Or maybe just done. I'll have someone look at the AC next week, he said. Okay. And I'm going to think about everything you said. You'll hear from me. He walked out. He didn't say goodbye. He just walked out and closed the door behind him. I stood there in my apartment with my binder and my shaking hands, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I'd won or lost. I didn't know if Frank was going to fix the AC or raise my rent, or evict me, or just ignore everything I'd said. I put the binder down on the table. I sat down on the couch. I was exhausted. I hadn't eaten anything all day. I realized I was sweating. And then I started laughing. Just sitting there alone in my apartment, laughing at myself. Because none of what I'd done felt brave or smart or strategic. It just felt desperate. Like I'd thrown a bunch of paper at a wall and hoped something stuck. I didn't know if anything was going to change. I didn't know if Frank was going to do anything about the AC, or the certificate, or anything. I just knew I couldn't pretend anymore that everything was fine. That was the part where I thought I'd lost. The part where it feels like you've done everything you can and you still have no idea if it mattered. The next week, the AC got fixed. The air conditioner got fixed the next week. I'm not even kidding. A guy showed up on Tuesday, poked around the unit for maybe an hour, and replaced some part I'd never heard of. It started working again. Cold air, the whole thing. I sat there in my living room feeling the cool air, and I should have felt good about it, but honestly I just felt confused. Like, was that it? Did I win? Or was Frank just buying time? I didn't hear anything from him for about 2 weeks. No email, no call, nothing. I kept waiting for something to happen. I kept checking my email like a crazy person. Every time my phone buzzed I thought it was Frank, and it was just spam, or my mom or something. I couldn't relax. Jen kept telling me to just let it go. He fixed the air conditioner. That's what you wanted. Just drop it. And I knew she was right. I should have just dropped it. But I couldn't. Because I knew about the certificate of occupancy thing now. I knew my apartment was technically illegal. And knowing that changed everything. I started having these weird thoughts. Like, what if Frank just evicted me and found some other tenant who didn't know about the certificate? That seemed like something he'd do. Or what if he just ignored the whole thing and hoped I'd forget? I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd poked a bear, and now I had to deal with whatever happened next. I decided I needed more. I needed to actually talk to someone at the city who could confirm what I'd found. I called the building department again. Same hold music. Same tired-sounding woman. But this time I asked for something specific. I asked if I could file a complaint about a property without a certificate of occupancy. She put me on hold again. I heard typing. She came back and said, "You can submit a complaint online. There's a form on our website." "Okay," I said. "And what happens after I submit it?" "An inspector will go out and evaluate the property. If there's a violation, the property owner will be notified and given a deadline to correct it." "And what if they don't correct it?" She sighed. I could hear her sighing. "Then we can revoke the certificate of occupancy, and the property can't be rented until it's brought up to code." I got off the phone and just sat there. Revocation. That's the word she used. Revocation. That's the nuclear option. If I filed that complaint and the city inspected and found problems, Frank couldn't rent the place anymore until he fixed everything. And knowing Frank, fixing everything would cost tens of thousands of dollars. I didn't file the complaint. Not right away. I just kept thinking about it. I kept going back and forth. 1 minute I'd be like, he deserves it, he's been ripping people off for years. The next minute I'd be like, what if he loses the building and someone else buys it and I get evicted anyway? It was exhausting. Then Frank called me. Out of nowhere. I saw his name on my phone and my stomach dropped. I almost didn't answer. But I did. "Hey," I said. "I've been thinking about what you showed me," he said. His voice was flat. Not angry, not friendly. Just flat. "The certificate thing." "Yeah? I want to see everything you have. All of it. The papers, the photos, everything." I hesitated. "Why?" "Because if there's a problem, I need to know what it is. I can't fix it if I don't know what I'm dealing with." I didn't trust him. I didn't trust him at all. But I also didn't see a way around it. If I wanted to actually resolve this, I needed to show him what I had. So I told him to come by on Saturday. He showed up at 10 o'clock in the morning. I was already nervous. I'd set out all my papers on the kitchen table. The binder, the photos, the printouts. Everything. I'd even made a little timeline of the building's history based on the records I'd found. It was ridiculous. I was like a crazy person with a crime board. Frank walked in. He looked at the table. He didn't sit down. He just stood there, staring at everything. "This is a lot," he said. "Yeah. It is." He picked up the property record. He looked at it. He put it down. He picked up my notes from the records office. He read through them slowly. I could see him getting more and more uncomfortable. "This is all public record," I said. "Anyone can find this stuff. I just spent some time looking." Frank didn't say anything. He just kept going through my papers. He picked up the photos of my apartment. The bathroom vent, the outlets, the weird ceiling patch. He looked at each one. "These are problems," I said. "If the city inspected, they'd find these. And they'd find more." "How do you know they'd find more?" "Because I looked up what they check for. Fire safety, egress, electrical, plumbing. This building hasn't been updated in decades. There's no way it passes." Frank put down the photos. He sat down at my kitchen table. He looked tired. Older than I'd remembered. "I've owned this building for 15 years, he said. "I bought it from a guy who bought it from another guy. Nobody ever told me about any certificate. I didn't even know it was a thing." "Okay," I said. I wasn't sure what to do with that information. "I've been renting these units out for years. Never had a problem. Never had an inspection. I just assumed everything was fine." "Well, it's not fine. It's never been fine. You just got lucky." Frank looked at me. I could see the anger there. It was right under the surface. But he was trying to keep it together. "What do you want?" he said. "Just tell me what you want." I sat down across from him. I was nervous. My hands were sweating. But I'd thought about this a lot. I knew what I wanted. I want the air conditioner fixed, which you already did. I want the rent to stay the same. I want my lease renewed for another year at the same rate. And then what? And then I don't file a complaint. I don't call the city. I just keep living here. Frank stared at me. "That's it. That's it. I'm not trying to destroy you. I just want to live in my apartment without you threatening to raise my rent." There was a long silence. I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. I could hear my own heart beating. "You're holding a gun to my head," Frank said. "You're telling me if I don't do what you want, you'll destroy my business. I'm telling you I have information. And I'm giving you a chance to fix things without the city getting involved. That's still a gun to my head. I don't know what to tell you. I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted my air conditioner fixed." Frank stood up. He walked over to the window. He stood there looking out at the street for a long time. I just sat there watching him. I didn't know what he was going to do. Finally he turned around. "I have to think about this," he said. "You have to give me time." "How much time?" "1 week. Maybe 2. "Okay." He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the knob. He didn't turn around. "You know, I've had tenants try to threaten me before," he said. "Lots of them. They think they can get something out of me. They always lose." I didn't say anything. "But you're not like them," he said. "You actually did your homework. I'll give you that." He left. The door closed behind him. I sat there at my kitchen table surrounded by my binder and my printouts, and I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like I'd just thrown a grenade into my own life, and I had no idea when it was going to explode. I spent the next 2 weeks in limbo. I didn't hear from Frank. Every day I expected him to call, or show up, or send some lawyer letter. But nothing happened. I kept checking my email, checking the mail, jumping every time my phone rang. It was the worst 2 weeks of my life. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus on work. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. Did I say too much? Did I not say enough? What if he just ignored me? What if he evicted me? What if I had to actually file that complaint, and get the city involved and everything got ugly? Jen kept saying, just give it time. He's probably trying to figure out what to do. But I couldn't wait. I was going crazy. I started looking up lawyers. Just in case. I found one that did tenant law, and they had a free consultation. I almost called. I had the number pulled up on my phone. But I didn't call. I couldn't afford a lawyer. And honestly, I didn't want to escalate things that much. I thought about what Frank had said. About me being different from other tenants. I didn't know if that was a compliment or a threat. I just knew I'd crossed a line and there was no going back. About 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Frank's property management company. Which was weird because he never used a management company. He always dealt with tenants directly. I opened it. It was a lease renewal. For 1 year. At the same rate. And there was a handwritten note at the bottom in Frank's handwriting. Air conditioners fixed. We're good. Frank. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of anything. Just a lease renewal and a note that said we were good. I sat there with the letter in my hands. I didn't know what to feel. I was relieved, obviously. But I was also angry. Like, this whole thing could have been avoided if he'd just fixed the air conditioner in the first place. Instead I had to become an amateur private investigator and threaten him with legal action. It was insane. But I signed the lease. I mailed it back. And I didn't file a complaint. I just let it go. I never told Frank I wasn't going to follow through. I wanted him to wonder. I wanted him to always be a little bit worried that I might still do something. It was petty, I know. But it made me feel better. The air conditioner is still working. The rent stayed the same. My apartment is still technically illegal. I still live in an unregistered unit in a house that the city thinks is a single-family home. I could still file that complaint if I wanted to. But I don't want to. I just want to live my life and not have to deal with Frank ever again. I don't think I won. I don't think anyone won. I think I just figured out how to be a more annoying problem than Frank was willing to deal with. And that was enough. I signed the lease and mailed it back. I used one of those little return receipt slips you can get at the post office. I don't know why. I just wanted proof that I had sent it. That's the kind of person I had become. Someone who needs proof of everything. The next few months were quiet. I kept expecting something to happen. Some kind of retaliation. But nothing ever did. Frank never called me again. He never sent another email. I would see him sometimes when he came by to do maintenance on the building, but he would just wave and keep walking. He didn't want to talk to me. I was fine with that. I stopped keeping the binder on my table. I put it in a box in my closet. I told myself I was done with all of it. I didn't need to keep looking at those documents. I didn't need to keep thinking about the certificate of occupancy and the building codes and all that stuff. I just needed to live my life. But I couldn't completely let go. Every few months, I would check the city's property database. Just to see if anything had changed. And it never did. The building was still listed as a single-family residence. There was still no certificate of occupancy on file. I don't know why I kept checking. I guess I wanted to know if Frank ever fixed it. If he ever actually did the right thing. He never did. About 6 months later, I got a letter from the city. It was addressed to current resident, and it was about some zoning hearing in the neighborhood. I almost threw it away. But I opened it. And there was a section that mentioned my street. It said the city was considering a review of properties that had been inconsistently categorized in the database. My heart started beating faster. I read the letter again. It was just a notification. A heads up that they were going to look at some properties. It didn't mean anything. It was probably just routine. But I couldn't help thinking about Frank. And the certificate of occupancy. And all those other tenants in the building who didn't know their apartments might be illegal. I didn't do anything. I didn't call Frank. I didn't call the city. I just sat with that letter for a few days, thinking about it, wondering if I should say something or just let it play out. Jen said it's not your problem anymore. You got what you wanted. Just let it go. And she was right. It wasn't my problem. I had gotten what I wanted. The air conditioner worked. The rent stayed the same. I had a year of peace. But I had also learned something. I had learned that Frank was never going to fix the certificate issue. He was never going to make the building legal. He was just going to keep collecting rent and hoping nobody noticed. And eventually, someone was going to notice. Maybe the city, maybe another tenant, maybe someone like me who just got tired of being ignored. I decided to let it go. I put the letter in the box with the binder and closed the lid. I told myself I was done. And I was. For a while. A few months after that, I found out the downstairs unit was being rented to a new tenant. I saw them moving in one Saturday. A young couple, maybe in their mid-20s. They had a U-Haul and they were struggling to get a couch up the stairs. I went out to help them. I don't know why I said it. It just came out. Hey, if you ever have any problems with the landlord, I know some stuff. Just for your information. They looked at me like I was crazy. Which I probably was. I had been living in that building for years, but I had become kind of a weirdo about everything. I had started thinking about the building as a problem to be solved instead of just a place to live. The guy thanked me. The girl smiled. They probably thought I was just some odd neighbor with a grudge. They had no idea about the binder in my closet, or the letters from the city or any of it. I went back inside. I sat on my couch and looked around at my apartment. It was still the same apartment. Still the same narrow stairs, the same ungrounded outlets, the same bathroom fan that vented into the attic. But it was also my apartment. The place I had lived for years. The place where I slept and ate and worked and lived. I realized I didn't want to leave. Not because of the apartment itself. But because I had fought for it. I had put in the work. I had spent all those nights researching and making calls and printing out documents. I had confronted Frank in my living room with a binder full of evidence. I had been terrified and I had done it anyway. And I had won. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that anyone would ever know about. But in the only way that mattered. I didn't have a story about being a hero. I had a story about being the most annoying person my landlord had ever met. I had a story about being the guy who wouldn't let it go. Who wouldn't just accept the broken air conditioner, and the rent increase and the dismissive phone calls. Who actually took the time to read the boring laws and look through the public records and make the annoying phone calls. That's not heroism. That's just stubbornness. That's just not being willing to take no for an answer. I still think about that binder sometimes. It's in my closet. I could probably throw it away. I don't need it anymore. But I keep it. Maybe because it reminds me that I am capable of doing things I never thought I could do. Maybe because it reminds me that being a little bit crazy can actually work out. Or maybe I keep it because I'm still a little bit paranoid. Because I know Frank is still out there. And I know he's probably still renting out illegal apartments. And I know that one day, someone else is going to realize what's going on and they are going to do something about it. And when that happens, I want to have my binder ready. Just in case. That's the thing about bureaucracy. It's boring and tedious and nobody wants to deal with it. But it's also the only thing that works. You can't fight a landlord with a broken air conditioner. You can't fight a landlord with threats or anger or pleading. You can only fight a landlord with paperwork. With documentation. With the knowledge that the law is on your side even if it feels like nobody is. That's what I learned. And I guess that's the whole story.